Hi, I'm someone who's really bad at Elden Ring, and because I'm so bad at it, I think I'm uniquely positioned to give other bad players or beginners tips on how to make this game easier. So every now and then, there are still new players to this game, despite all the years ago that it came out, and especially with the Tarnished Edition right around the corner, there may be an influx of new people who are getting into the game and need a little bit of help, and I'm here for you. So I'm going to give you 11 tips, almost a full dozen, because I don't know how to edit down to shorter lists, apparently, on how to make this game a bit more approachable, because Elden Ring really is a game that isn't hard unless you choose to make it hard intentionally. And treat this as like a menu of different options to try out if you're struggling. You don't have to do all of these, though you can do all of them, but, pick the ones that maybe fit your gameplay style, try them out, and see if it makes things easier for you. And the first tip is a tip that the game itself tries to teach you not once but twice right off the bat, and that tip is come back later. You're very likely going to lose to the grafted Scion, and then a little bit after that, when you exit onto Limgrave, there's going to be a guy on a horse who is also going to give you a good murdering. And the message it's being taught with these bosses is to come back later when you are higher level, when you have better gear, and when you're a little less bad at the game. There's a lot to explore. You don't need to grind out the same content over and over again to get better. Just go to new places, and eventually, then you'll be able to come back later and give these guys their comeuppance. You don't have to worry about a level cap. There technically is one, but most people never even get close to it. And the only person who can ever decide if you are over-leveled for the content is you. If the game is too hard, level up more. If the game is, getting a little too easy, well, back off on leveling up, spend your runes somewhere else. But don't feel like there is some set number of levels that if you hit that, you're over-leveled. That's nonsense. That doesn't exist. Play whatever feels good to you. Tip number 2 is to use ranged attacks. This doesn't mean to be a spellcaster. This doesn't mean that ranged attacks are your primary means of dealing damage, but having them in your arsenal is going to make things a lot easier. And there are several options that have little to no prerequisites that almost anyone can do. Fire pots and bone darts are available to pretty much everybody. If you have a little bit of a caster bent, then glintstone pebble is great. And if you don't mind running to Liurnia of the Lakes, you can pick up this little thing called the Wraith Calling Bell that has absurd range and tracking. Or if you're truly masochistic, you can use a bow. And while they're handy just for whittling down the health of someone before you engage them in melee combat, they're even more important for our next tip. And that next tip, tip number 3, is to isolate enemies. I died a lot in my first playthrough just because I waded into a pack of 3 or 4 enemies and effectively got stun-locked by them, and they just, murdered me to pieces. Those ranged attacks that we picked up can be very handy to get the attention of one of a group of enemies so that, the AI isn't that smart. That one enemy, if you hit him with a ranged attack, he'll come to you. You can take him out one-on-one without drawing the aggro of the rest of the group. Stealth is also handy here. Sneak up on, guys who are off wandering on their own and take them out one at a time without, having the army come down upon you. Tip number 4 is to use guard counters. So guard counters, if you are unfamiliar with them, are holding down L1 to block with your shield, and then when an opponent's attack bounces off of them, you tap R2 to follow up immediately with a heavy attack that does a ton of stance damage and will break the stance of a lot of weaker enemies, leaving you able to follow up with a critical hit that'll usually kill them right off the bat. This is much easier than parrying and involves a lot less stamina management than shield poking, which is something you can do from behind shields with spears and other thrusting weapons, and it's just really effective. I mean, in the game's tutorial itself, if you have the tips turned on, when you make it to the boss of the tutorial, it literally tells you to guard counter him to beat him. And that's because that is how you can beat a lot of these little trash mob soldiery guys in essentially a single attack. And even if you don't start with a shield, one of the best ones is farmable right off the bat in Gatefront Ruins. And the most important thing about guard countering is just how good it feels when you do it correctly. Tip number 5 is to ask for help. And help in the context of Elden Ring means using Spirit Ashes and NPC summons. Contrary to what a lot of experienced Souls-like players will tell you, it is not cheating to use Spirit Ashes. They put a lot of effort into putting them into the game so that you would use them. They are optional, you don't have to use them, but it's okay if you do. And I mean, right off the bat, the 3 wolves that Ronnie gives you right away in the beginning, they are very good for those opening areas. A lot of times they can stun lock weaker bosses just so you can wail away on them. It also adds an additional layer of customization because a lot of Spirit Ashes play differently, so the feel of using one Spirit Ash versus another is going to completely change how a combat feels, and I like that. NPC summons are available outside of a lot of boss rooms, and they're a little bit more complicated as to whether they're always better. It's a little build dependent. Usually I recommend them if you're either attacking with ranged attacks and you need someone else to hold aggro, or it's just a really aggressive boss and you need someone to take the heat off. They can actually make some fights harder. So NPC summons that are outside of a fog wall, if you summon them, they will actually give the boss on the other side of the fog wall more health, more resistance to stance breaking, and more resistance to status effects. So that is a pretty big asterisk around whether or not you should use NPC summons for a particular fight. If you're using an NPC summon and the fight seems a little bit hard, the boss seems a little bit spongy, try it without him and see if the fight goes any easier. Note that if a summon sign is inside the fog wall, then it doesn't have that kind of buffing effect on the boss, and feel free to use those if you want. Tip number 6 is to use Torrent. And in this context, I don't just mean use Torrent as a means of transportation, I mean using Torrent in combat. And this is very much a feel thing. I know a lot of people hate using Torrent in combat, but it does trivialize a lot of the encounters early in the game if you can just kite them by zipping around the enemies quickly on Torrent. There are encounters like the troll-drawn cart procession outside of Waypoint Ruins. You can just kite that entire army there and feel like a god on Torrent taking them out. Similarly, overworld bosses, like that guy on the horse earlier in the game when you came out of Limgrave. Fighting him on Torrent makes that fight a lot easier. Cavalry was effective, and give it a shot and see if that helps you out. Tip number 7 is to use status effects. And the status effect that is most readily available in the early game is Bleed. Now, I don't mean make like an arcane focused build necessarily, but if you are just picking up weapons, look for ones that do bleed buildup, and then go to Fort Hate and learn how to make blood grease, or find some buff spells that apply blood loss buildup to your weapon, like Blood Flame Blade. What these will do is these will make a lot of boss fights easier. Some bosses are immune to bleed, but if you're finding you're having a hard time killing bosses quickly, adding blood loss buildup will help take off chunks of boss health bars relatively quick and easy. And there are several early game Ashes of War that are really effective at helping you to build up blood loss quickly. The flail that you can find in the back of a wagon in the Gatefront Ruins, it has Spinning Chain on it just so you can build up blood loss quickly. Additionally, on the path right up to Stormvale Castle, you can find Wild Strikes, which you can slap on the Morningstar and other weapons to swing them quickly and help build up that status buildup as fast as possible. Tip number 8 is to find your truck. And what I mean is something that hits like a truck. Something that is an unstoppable attack that will allow you to trade blows with an enemy, ignore it if they hit you, even if you have crappy poise, and then do a ton of stance damage against them to help incapacitate them. And just like bleed buildup, there are several options available both in Limgrave and the Weeping Peninsula that hit like a truck. There are 4 early game ones that I'll recommend here. Endure, Stamp Upward Cut, again Wild Strikes, and, if you don't mind looking silly, Lion's Claw. So with Endure, you activate it, you get a bunch of damage reduction, and then you get a few seconds to act with impunity without fear of being interrupted by attacks. Put it on a big heavy weapon, use the charged R2, and you will do a ton of stance damage. You can buy it really early on from Knight Bernal up near Stormvale Castle, and you can put on any weapon you want. Doesn't have to be a big weapon, I just prefer to put on something that has reach and does a lot of stance damage. Stamp Upward Cut is another one you can buy from Knight Bernal, or you can just pick it up on the Lordsworn's Greatsword on a wagon in the Gatefront Ruins. Activate the Ash of War and follow up with an R2 for a heavy stance damage attack that will actually apply a little bit of crowd control by throwing some humanoid enemies up into the air. I mentioned Wild Strikes earlier. In this context, it has a heavy follow-up, so after you've activated it, if you press R2, you'll flip through the air with an attack that has a fair amount of hyper armor and again does high stance damage. And then Lion's Claw you can pick up on the Claymore down in Castle Morn. I think it looks funny, but a lot of people like it. And I should also add here that this decision on finding what Ash of War you like, it doesn't have to be, this is my Ash of War, this is my build. Change it. There's Sites of Grace that have the Ash of War menu for a reason. Switch between these and other Ash of Wars as much as you want. Different ones are going to be better for different bosses, and swap them around at will. Don't lock yourself in, but find some hard-hitting hyper armor / super armor Ashes of War, and it will make things easier. Tip number 9 is to get Supplemental Healing. And by supplemental, I mean healing that is in addition to your red flasks. The easiest way to do this is to start off as one of the faith-based classes like the Prophet or Confessor. They just get healing spells right out of the gate. If you're not one of them, you can unlock Roundtable Hold and be able to buy the heal spell there, provided you have a Sacred Seal to cast it with. But aside from that, there are other opportunities to get regen. There's the Blessed Dew Talisman that you can get down in the Weeping Peninsula. There is a regen Crimson Tear, which you can also get down in the Weeping Peninsula. And then there is one of my favorite items for the early game, which is the Assassin Crimson Dagger, which you can get in the Death Touched Catacombs. That is a talisman that every time you crit will give you supplemental healing. That one in particular is good even against bosses if you are able to inflict large amounts of stance damage by hitting like a truck. Tip number 10 is that damage avoidance isn't all about dodge rolls. My biggest misconception that I had prior to playing Elden Ring is that to avoid damage in this game, you had to learn the timing on every attack from every enemy in the game, and then you had to perfectly time a dodge roll to avoid damage. But there's so much more to avoiding damage in this game than just using dodge rolls. You know, I've talked about using shields, using damage reduction Ashes of War like Endure, but even more fundamental than that is like basic movement and jumping. And if you find you're having issues timing a dodge against a certain attack, try just walking around the attack. In a lot of cases, you don't even have to dodge roll. A lot of fast-moving projectiles don't have tracking. You just walk to the left or right to avoid them. A slow wind-up attack from an enemy, a lot of times those don't have particularly good tracking either. You can just walk backwards and avoid them. For earth-shattering ground attacks, again, you don't dodge, you just jump into the air. That can either be you or Torrent jumping into the air in some cases. And even if you can't do any of that, armor and damage reduction in this game is actually pretty robust. Stacking heavy armor with damage reduction talismans, it's good and it works. You don't really have to dodge that much if you choose to just make a tanky character. And if you just look at a lot of the damage talismans in this game, they kind of stink relative to the damage reduction ones. Situational 10% damage boost versus like a 20 to 30% damage reduction. The defensive ones are kind of better. And my last tip is, what is the best build type for a beginner? And by build type, a lot of people will say they're running a strength build, an arcane build, or some hybrid int dex build. Essentially, when someone's describing their build in Elden Ring, a lot of times they're saying, these are my damage statistics. And I'm here to tell you that if you're a beginner in this game and you are struggling, the best build for you to make is Vigor Endurance, which have absolutely nothing to do with damage. If you're struggling to stay alive, don't pump your damage attributes. Just put enough into those to equip the gear you want to use, and put everything else into Vigor and Endurance, at least until you're feeling comfortable. Vigor will give you health, which will make you be able to make a lot more mistakes in terms of avoiding damage, and Endurance, in addition to letting you wear heavy armor and wield heavy gear, it's also going to increase the length of your stamina bar so that you don't have to manage stamina as much, and you don't want to worry about that as a beginner. Focusing on those defensive attributes is just an easier way to go, especially if you're taking advantage of status effects to take chunks off of big boss health bars anyways. And even in the early game, there are crystal tiers and talismans to buff your damage attributes anyways, so that you can focus your level ups on Vigor, on Endurance, and then get the help you need on the damage side from talismans and other buffs. And if you really want a recommendation on what sort of attributes you should focus on in terms of damage types, I will say that Strength Faith is very well supported for beginners. Strength will open up access to a very large variety of both one-handed and two-handed swords and assorted bonky weapons, as well as giving you access to a bunch of shields as well. While Faith opens up healing, buffs, and a large variety of ranged attacks for you to explore. Strength Faith is just a good combo if you're not sure what you want and you want to try things out. But anywho, that is my quick set of advice for new players who are dipping their toes into Elden Ring and maybe struggling a little bit. And I guess it didn't end up that quick because I'm just horrible at editing my thoughts down, but that's okay. I accept this, and hopefully you do too. Thanks for listening. Bye.